Hi, I'm Ryan, and welcome to Countersteer, a podcast where we try to give bite-sized chunks of automotive history. We're a new podcast, so if we fumble something along the way, please forgive us. I find cars fascinating, and I hope that you will too. And with that now, let's get started on the Malaise Era. Okay, picture the scene. It's 1969, and you're cruising down Route 1 in California. Wind careening through your hair, life is great. You're driving this massive gas-guzzling Ford Mustang GT350, finished in a beautiful gloss blue with white stripes running down the middle. The quintessential American muscle car that defined an era. But then it all comes crashing down as just a few short years later, you're forced to sell the car due to the 1973 oil crisis. This fantasy is what happened to many people during the period between roughly 1973 and 1983, known as the Malaise Era. The Malaise Era is a term that is often used to refer to the U.S. automobile market during that time from 73 to 83. The word malaise originates from French, actually meaning, quote, a feeling of general discomfort or overall feeling of not being healthy or happy. The term is one that strikes fear into many muscle car lovers' hearts, as to put it lightly, the cars this time weren't really the greatest. During this time, there were many pivotal things that happened in the American landscape, which included laws regarding safety, emissions, and strides towards efficiency, which really impacted the auto industry. Now, safety wasn't exactly a word in most American automakers' vocabulary before 1973. When looking at the period before then, one of the most prominent media from this time about safety, or the lack thereof, is Unsafe at Any Speed. Unsafe at Any Speed was a book published in 1965 by Ralph Nader, accusing the American automotive industry of, quote, prioritizing style and design over consumer safety. This book had massive implications and sent lots of ripples through the auto industry, and the U.S. government finally had to make some laws regulating the American auto industry. The most notable change that this book created was that it helped America's first, quote, significant automotive safety legislation, which was the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act in 1966. Just seven short few years later, American automobile safety would change forever. In 1973, the NHTSA, or National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, will roll out this massive new set of laws for automakers for the 1973 model year, regarding low-speed vehicle crash testing capabilities. Basically what that means is cars would have to be really sturdy as they had to roll into a barrier at 5 miles an hour, and they had to be able to withstand no substantial damage to vital vehicle systems like headlights, the horn, and the fuel system, right? The opposite was also true, as the car had to roll backwards into a barrier at 2.5 miles an hour and be able to withstand it. Now thinking about this, right? 5 miles an hour, 2.5 doesn't mean anything, right? They're like really tiny, small speeds. But when you actually look behind the surface, a few thousand pounds, a little bit of physics here, a few thousand pounds of momentum going, and then you're crashing into a barrier, and like small pieces of plastic really just holding this car and the barrier, and just like this massive conflict that ensues. And you have those fragile components on the front, like lights and things. There's a lot of physics at play, which basically led to not the greatest time for automakers. And so the easiest way to pass these new regulation hurdles, being, a cheap automaker, was to tack on some massively large excessive barrier bumpers, which created this barrier that allowed them to pass these regulations. And so if you go and look at pictures of BMWs from this era, like E30s and stuff like that, you can see they have these massive, some were optioned as chrome, but they have these massive bumpers, which are just horrendously ugly, but they met the safety standards, which was all that mattered to sell the car. Now, safety wasn't the only thing that the auto marques were in conflict with. During the time of the 1970s, right, going a little bit into history, much of the Western world was dealing with repercussions of the 1973 energy crisis. I don't want to get too much into politics and this and that, but it was Middle Eastern conflicts, which led to, quote, substantial petroleum shortages, and cars from this era weren't exactly known for being conservative on their fuel usage, with their, massive engines and boat bodies to haul being so many feet long. But this massive oil crisis really was hard-hitting, as the price of oil, which this really incredibly vital lifeline of the auto world, had prices see nearly a 300% increase. And so a 300% increase, you're not going to drive, your massive Lincoln Town Car anymore. So basically, the Great American Muscle Car and the Lincoln Town Car took yet another hit in 1973. And this didn't result in just the downturn of muscle cars, as many Americans had disavowed the American marks as a whole. And so what this led to was, okay, we don't want these American cars anymore. They're costing us too much. There's this 300% increase. So what it led to was consumers searching for foreign options. And so thus what happened was the U.S. saw this massive rise in the importation of foreign cars. And so the harsh realities of the 1970s with these oil crisis and emissions regulations and safety, all of this led to the decline in the appeal of American cars, which created this opening for foreign automakers to really come in and weasel their way into the market and start to leave their mark on the U.S. industry. And so foreign automakers, particularly from Japan and a little bit of Europe as well, they're really quick to capitalize on these changing market dynamics, right? So you had brands like Toyota, Honda, Datsun, which is now Nissan, and Volkswagen, who offer their cars in not only smaller and more efficient fuel efficient packages, they were being known for their reliability and their affordability, right? So, you had these cars like the Toyota Corolla, the Honda Civic, and the Beetle that started to become more household names, and they started to represent this new era of practical and economical transportation as compared to, previous gen American cars, which are the complete opposite of these. And so the rise of these cars foreign cars wasn't just about practicality, but it also signaled this massive cultural shift, right? You have these sleek and compact designs of these Japanese and European cars, which are appealing to a younger generation of Americans who were sort of increasingly disillusioned with these gas-guzzling cars of their parents' era and didn't want to be associated with, the station wagons and things like that. And so these vehicles, represented this sort of forward-thinking approach that wasn't just about cars but just the whole era in itself in history. But going back to America, these big three, Ford, Chrysler, and GM, they face massive significant challenges, right? And so what they had to do was invest heavily in new technology and redesign completely from the ground up, basically, right? These new cars that would meet the evolving demands of the market and of legislation, right? And so you saw cars like the Ford Pinto, the Chevrolet Vega, the AMC Gremlin, not particularly massive selling cars, but it was a shift. And so these early attempts, they did fall short of quality and performance as compared to their former counterparts, right? Or their foreign counterparts, but they tried, right? It's what you can give them. And so the 1970s really transformed the auto industry. Or looping back, right, as the oil crisis and these new regulations ended what many considered this golden period of the muscle car era, with these stricter safety and emissions rules, which led to bulkier, less powerful cars, which really disappointed enthusiasts, and the rising fuel costs, which drove not only the enthusiasts, but the basic American consumer to start actually choosing or having this option in their mind. We don't have to focus centrally on American cars, but there are these fuel efficient foreign cars like the Toyota Corolla and the Honda Civic that do look quite appealing. So it gave them these massive new options, which were quite flattering to many, right? And so that wraps up another episode of Countersteer. Hopefully you learned something new or had just something to listen to quite briefly to learn a little bit, right? So what we hope for. I'm not sure what the next episode will be. I guess it's just whatever rabbit hole I find myself in. Thanks so much for listening.